to begin, and we'll begin with certifying closed. Dr. Anderson, did you want to lead? Would you like to read that motion?
I will go ahead and certify closed. If you want, you could go ahead and do the attendance. You could do roll call. That would be very helpful. Thank you.
Sure. See, Dr. Anderson is here. Ms. Tolan.
Yes, I'm here. Thank you.
Great. Ms. Omesh.
Here.
Mr. Frisch.
Hello.
Hello. Ms. Pekarsky.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Hello. Ms. McLaughlin.
I'm here, just switching computers.
Sure, great. Okay, I see we have 7, so we have a quorum. So let's go ahead. Dr. Anderson, shall I turn it back over to you?
Yes, thank you. We will certify closed. In order to comply with sections 2.2-3712D of the Code of Virginia, it is necessary for the board to certify that since the Fairfax County School Board convened a closed session on May 18, 2021, to the best of each member's knowledge, only public business matters lawfully exempted from open meeting requirements and only such public business matters as were identified in the motion convening the closed session were heard, discussed, or considered by the board during the closed meeting. Who will move the motion? Thank you, Ms. Marin. Seconded. Thank you, Mr. Frisch. All in favor? We have Ms. Marin, Mr. Frisch, Ms. Tolan. Bear with me as I make my way down. Ms. Keys-Gamarra, Ms. McLaughlin, Ms. Pekarsky, and myself. That is 7. Close has been certified. Thank you. We'll turn it back over to you, Ms. Marin. You're on mute.
Oh, my big exciting opening about finally being close to wrapping up this budget. So this afternoon, we are having our final work session on creating and finalizing the fiscal year 22 budget. The board will be voting on action to approve this on this Thursday at our regular meeting, which begins at 7 p.m. So today's purpose is to go through any remaining questions or comments, and particularly to go through any proposed amendments or follow-on motions that are expected to be brought on Thursday. So for commenting, we're going to follow the format that we did at our past work session just prior to approving the advertised budget, which is when folks make amendments or follow-ons, the makers of those actions will have 3 minutes to speak. And then if others could please keep your comments to 2 minutes, then we can be sure to get through things since we did start 40 minutes late and we do have other meetings starting at 6 today. So first I'm going to ask Ms. Burden to please just give us a very brief reminder of where some things stand, and then it'll turn back to us to have our working conversation about amendments and follow-on motions. Thank you.
If one of this, thank you. So good afternoon. Today, as Ms. Marin said, we're going to just do a quick review of the superintendent's recommended adjustments to balance the fiscal 22 budget to the funding levels approved by the county and state, and then jump straight into amendments and follow-ons that have been submitted. This first chart identifies the superintendent's recommended adjustments to balance. We've reduced compensation from 3% to 2%. We're recommending a deferral of instructional resources and textbooks, although we hope to replenish that with year end. We're shifting the FCPS on lease payment to ESSER2, as well as the new 24.5 T-specs that were funded from CARES and were new in this current year. They'll be funded with federal grants in fiscal 22 as well, but will need to be built into the operating fund for 23. Enrollment was trimmed by 1,145 students. Staffing reserve was also trimmed by 33 positions. We were recently notified that there wouldn't be any utilities rate increase in fiscal 22. We've deferred the special revenue placeholder since it's unlikely that that review will be completed until the end of fiscal 22. And then there is one addition of 3.6 million for 5 psychologists and 13 social workers to meet the new SOQ requirements. And the total of the recommended adjustments aligns with the gap of 61.2 million. If you can go to the next slide, this just shows the 2 amendments that have been submitted by board members. The first one is from Ms. Pekarsky, and it eliminates the revenue for FCPS on tech support fees and replaces that with an increase in the beginning balance from savings in fiscal 21. And a second one from Ms. Corbett Sanders eliminates the 200,000 allocated for young scholars after school or summer enrichment activities and allocates those funds on a per pupil basis to schools with young scholars, with a suggestion that we fund the after school and summer enrichment activities with ESSER 3. And then the final slide are the follow-ons, which of there are 3. One asking for a comparative analysis of parent liaison salaries and benefits from Dr. Anderson, a comparative analysis of bus driver and bus attendant salaries and benefits from Ms. Pekarsky. And the third one is asking for a look at assistant principal staffing at schools with large preschool programs and large numbers of students with IEPs from Ms. Corbett Sanders. And that's it.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Burden. So we'll go ahead and kick off with Ms. Pekarsky, who will actually speak to both her amendment and her follow-on, since she has a scheduling conflict in a little bit. So, Ms. Pekarsky?
Yeah,
And if,
thank you.
and I don't know if you want to leave up, do we need the screen up that has the language? I don't want to sacrifice people's faces for that, but perhaps at the initial, at least start. You want to put that up?
Yeah, I mean, this will be very quick. Thank you.
Sure.
As Ms. Burden did, I think, a good job of talking about this and introducing it. And it was something that we had spoken to at our last budget meeting, and there seemed to be strong support at that time. I mean, the real basis for this is that I think many on this board have agreed that technology and our computers and our one-to-one program has really become an integral part of how our kids access their day-to-day instruction. And if that's the case, we do not charge for textbooks, and we should, I believe, not be charging for these materials that are really such an important part of our overall access to education. And the follow-on really came from concerns that I have heard from advocates and topic of conversation in other on other school boards in our region, and you know, being able to bring in new bus drivers and retain them. And I know, as Mr. Plattenberg shared at our last meeting, we also have many that are eligible for retirement. And this is really, when I looked at some of these salaries comparatively, we need to be competitive in order to attract people and keep them. We have a large bus fleet, and we really depend on this service for our students to come to school. So I'd like to get some comparison, see how that shakes out, and get an opinion from the superintendent if are there any changes that we may have to potentially think about going into next year. So thank you.
Great, thank you. So if people have questions, please go ahead and raise your hand, and just please try to keep it to 2 minutes. And actually what we want to do, I'm remembering now from our previous work session prior to vote, is we went around and just took a pulse where everyone was so we could get a sense of what might be likely to pass. Again, last time we ended up doing an omnibus package, right? So that is an expedient way to get through any additional amendments or any amendments and follow-on motions. So in trying to show support today or not of where people stand, that will help us expedite our vote on Thursday and answer any questions in the meantime. So does someone want to please go first in sharing any questions for Ms. Pekarsky? Ms. Corbett-Sanders.
I just want to thank Ms. Pekarsky for bringing this to the table and fully support her recommendation for the budgetary change. It is something that I think we all recognize that the past year that access to technology has become, part of the bread and butter of the world-class education system that we're offering, and we should not be requiring people to pay a fee for it.
Thank you. Any other comments? Shall we do it this way? Does anyone oppose this? Oh, Megan has a question or comment. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. I don't know, I will ask the clerk of the board if someone can please resend links. For some reason, it's not showing up in my inbox to link in. So I'm
For the
trying.
meeting, you mean? For the
Yeah,
Zoom link?
I'm on my iPad, but I'm really trying to get onto my laptop for this. So I just want to echo what Ms. Corbett-Sanders said. For several years, I have had concerns about how we charge fees to families. And I think without question, what we really need to be hearing either today or at the board table in front of the public is from the superintendent on where is his administration on this, because we're sorry, I'm getting a message to join. I think we want to basically understand from him, $4.3 million is going to be an ongoing occurring expense. As the superintendent of schools, I'd like to get an understanding of his support for this and how his team will absorb this cost, and why didn't this come forward from his own team? Why is it taking a board member to do this? Because I agree with what Ms. Pekarsky's saying. We've now created through FCPS these laptops are becoming essentially part of the students' day-to-day education. So the fees were brought up in question in the past as well.
Dr. Brabrand?
Sure. Well, thank you, Ms. McLaughlin, for that question. I mean, I would tell you that a year unlike any other, this pandemic has had us have to re-question our assumptions and our planning. One of the things that you may know, and a reminder to the board and the community, when the pandemic hit, we did reach out to the county, and the county helped us this year by providing dollars to support us through this year for the fees. Again, in the middle of the pandemic, trying to plan for the budget and where the pandemic would be, how quickly we would get in and out of it. It wasn't something that I brought forward in January, partly because there was really no funding at that time, even really being supported in terms of additional funding from the county. But I fully support using year-end dollars, and I will work to find savings in our school system or work with the county executive moving forward. And honestly, what we really have happening here is the county helped us in the year of the pandemic. We're taking care of it at year end as we're coming out of the pandemic. And then we're going to need to identify ongoing dollars to support this moving forward, because it's now become an indispensable part of the student experience, as you and Ms. Pekarsky so well said.
So from your standpoint, we'll be able to use the year-end funds to cover it for the upcoming year by not having to necessarily make any changes to the proposed budget, which I do appreciate to give you credit. You have made changes since January.
We made a
so-
few, yes, yes.
So,
And and that was one we just didn't anticipate, but we're glad to take a year and we'll fully plan either through internal savings or some collaboration with the county to make sure that this doesn't come up as a reoccurring fee again for our residents and our parents and kids.
great. Thank you, Dr.
Thank you. Any other questions on Ms. Pekarsky's amendment or follow-on? So, Megan, are you raising your hand again?
No, trying to
Oh,
get it to
okay.
respond.
Okay, okay. So can I have a show of hands then if anyone opposes either the amendment or, okay, I see Ms. Sizemore Heiser has her hand up for a question.
Yeah, I mean, just a quick question. I appreciate what Dr. Brabrand shared about sort of how to work with the county going forward. I guess I'm maybe more of a comment. I'm still concerned about kind of how this will impact programs going forward. And so I know, Dr. Brabrand, it may be hard for you to sort of answer what may change in our budget or what may change and what you propose for next year based on losing the 4.3 million revenue. But if you have ideas on whether you think this is going to be an impact, I fully agree with the idea of Ms. Pekarsky said that, you know, if technology is so integrated into the way we do schooling that it's seen as textbooks and we shouldn't be charging for it. But I'm just curious if you have any thoughts on how this may impact future budgets.
Yeah, you know, one thing I would tell you again, as everyone just said, how things are so fast developing in the pandemic. Virginia, the Commonwealth of Virginia is now forecasting a record surplus of revenue this year. It's time after the Commonwealth has experienced this pandemic, I think, for the state to step up and really talk about supporting technology as a universal support for students across the Commonwealth, not just in Fairfax, where we ask our own residents to contribute far and above what the state supplies. So I'm hopeful. The General Assembly is going to be meeting soon in the summer. They're going to be available to talk about what that year-end surplus is and some of the federal funds. But I think it's time to start to move technology into the realm, as Ms. Pekarsky said, textbooks that are provided through state funds to support teaching and learning for our kids and our teachers. So I don't have answers for that yet, but I have to be honest, if you're asking me what one of my thoughts is, I think we've got a moment out of this pandemic to rethink, because prior to the pandemic, it was each school system trying to come up with the infrastructure and dollars to support technology learning. And I think we're in a different place now that we're not going to return to again.
Okay, thank you.
Sizemore Heiser. Okay. Should I wait a second? Any other questions formulating, comments? Ms. Omesh.
Yeah, thank you. I know I had a follow-up question from the previous meeting just regarding some of the rationale and thinking through prioritization for some of the items, especially facilities-wise. Can we provide some clarity on whether there's been some thought around that or any development? That was a budget question I had, but to inform a potential amendment, but I know I haven't gotten a response, so. You're muted, Dr. Weber.
Mr. Planenberg, Ms. Burden, do we have the feedback or follow-up from that budget question? I know we've tried to work to get most of those done here prior to Thursday. Is that one that we've been able to finish?
I don't believe so. I believe it's still being worked. It's still in development.
Okay, maybe we can try to see if we can have it, Jeff, by tomorrow. So there's at least, you know, that 24-hour notice for Ms. Omesh to get any questions answered to inform if there would be an additional amendment on Thursday.
Okay, thank you. And I don't have any issues with some of what was presented, but appreciate all the work that's been done on this. I know it's always, you know, a tough process.
And we have been trying to work with board members in advance, and I won't speak for other board members right now, but I know I've still been working, for example, with I think another board member who may have things to share later in this conversation that I'm certainly sharing with Ms. Burden, but I won't speak for that board member at this time. And of course, if there is anything else from any of you right now, Ms. Vernon and I will work with you all appropriately between now and Thursday. So thanks.
Thank you. I see Ms. McLaughlin's hand raised. Does anyone else have a question for their first go round, if any? No? Okay, Ms. McLaughlin, Ms. Cohen. So 2 minutes for, first comment and a minute, please, for the second round. So Ms. Cohen, go ahead, please.
No, I'm so sorry. I was just going to ask a point of order. Did you want to get through each individual My comment was not on Ms. Pekarsky's piece. It was a later question. So I just got confused about the process. My apologies.
No, that's okay, Ms. Cohen. You're going to ask about whether we should vote one at a time or in culmination, because I couldn't recall what we did the last meeting. Do you remember and refresh my memory?
Yeah, I think last time you had everybody go through their individual pieces and then we used our 2 minutes.
That's
to
right.
adjust.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. So, so we can go ahead and do that. Thanks for helping me remember. Ms. McLaughlin, did you have a comment on Ms. Pekarsky's items?
No, it was like Laura Jane Cohen's. I wanted to just understand the process. I do want to ask something that's not been listed as a budget amendment yet, but later on.
Yeah, great. Okay, great. We'll definitely have time, yes, of course, to talk about non-listed items and anything anybody else wants to bring, of course. So, all right. So let's move on then to Ms. Corbett Sanders' item. She has the amendment that's listed second on our slide. And then Ms. Corbett Sanders, if you want to go ahead and talk to your follow-on, perhaps that'll be most expeditious to just have you speaking to both of your items at the same time. So amendment and the follow-on.
Thank you, Ms. Marin. And I want to thank the whole budget team for all of their work. I know even as late as this afternoon, you guys are posting responses to questions, and really appreciate that. This amendment is one about equity for all of our students. For years, we have funded enrichment activities during the day for students that are in our local level 4 programs, as well as our center programs. And we have funded enrichment for all other students at a much lower rate. For example, if you are in a local level 4 program, you are funded for enrichment per child at 16.07 cents. And the amount of funding for all other children is 5% of that per child. So I really appreciated the superintendent and his team coming forward with some language that would allow for enrichment activities during the summer and after school. For our young scholars. There is no other enrichment funding provided for our young scholars. However, what I am suggesting is budget neutral, which would allow for that money that is allocated for after school programs and summer programs to be moved into the enrichment activities that are provided during the day, and would be a fund that the AARTs that we have just put in all these schools would be able to access that funding and be able to provide those services. We do know that there's always a challenge with after school programming for access to transportation. And so this ensures that the kids that we want to benefit will benefit from it. Additionally, I am asking for the superintendent to utilize ESSER funds for those summer school programming and after school enrichment programming, because as we know from the ESSER 3 funds, that's exactly what that funding is for. And so what this does is free up funding and targets it to those children that would greatly benefit. And for a sense of numbers, there's almost 16,000 students that are in our local level 4 and AAP centers, while there are 12,000 young scholars in our K through 8. And so this would put the funding there. And I very much appreciate, I've spoken with both Dr. Brabrand and Dr. Presidio about how this could work, and both have said that they think this would be a good use of funds. So on the second piece, which is the follow-on action, this is one which is yet again another equity piece. As some people know, we have a number of elementary schools that have very large preschool programs. Laura Jane and I actually share one of these schools, being Holly Elementary, and they have 79 kids in the preschool program, as well as a very large population of students, exceptional students with disabilities. Yet they don't have an AP that can support that activity. They always have to take funding and trade it. And so what we are asking here is not to address that school specifically this year, but rather, if I can just finish up, but rather to have the superintendent explore how we can best meet the needs of these elementary schools.
Thank you, Ms. Corbett Sanders. So I see hands up from Ms. Tolan and Ms. Cohen, but I didn't see who was first. Can either of you attest to that, or?
Ms. Tolan was first.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Tolan. Go ahead.
All right, don't know who was first. A quick question, maybe it's for Dr. Presidio. The 0.2 million that could be utilized for the young scholars enrichment. Like, what do we know? Like, what kinds of things that might include? It seems like a small amount of money for the large number of young scholars that we have. So how can we make that money go as far as we can?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And thank you again to Ms. Corbett Sanders for offering this as a budget amendment, because you're right, it is a small amount of money, but it's money that we don't currently have in the budget. And we have not funded our young scholars previously and are not, haven't been in a position where we have any funding available that we provide on a per pupil basis to the schools. So right now schools are providing enrichment services largely in, literacy, math, and science to students, particularly things like STEM, robotics activities, computer science activities that they're making available. And they're having to figure out how to use existing funds to do that, which means we don't have consistent and coherent experiences across all of our schools for all of our students to participate in those kinds of activities. So this would give us some base level funding on par with what schools receive in their per pupil allocations for level 4 students. And it would be a good place for us to start and build from.
Thank you very much. I certainly fully support any way we can use our money wisely to augment our Young Scholars Program. So thank you, Ms. Corbett Sanders.
Ms. Cohen.
Sure, thank you. I had a couple of questions. I guess the first is just to ensure that we can sort of broadly, I know we work to broadly define who qualifies for young scholars, but just to make sure that we're expanding those opportunities to as many kids as humanly possible, which in the early grades, I certainly would say probably any kid who has not much access, but has interest. And so I'm supportive of that. And I really appreciate Ms. Corbett Sanders bringing that up. The second one is certainly near and dear to my heart, and I really appreciate that. My only question would be if it would be possible, if you would be amenable, Ms. Corbett Sanders, to potentially adding in high levels of 504s as well. I just have a real concern at our elementary schools about who's able to manage 504s and local screening and all that good stuff, since we have not yet put in any of our given money for local sped chairs. So that would be my only question with it, but hugely supportive of more admin support for managing our and helping assist these large specialized programs.
Chair Marin, can I respond to that?
Yes, please do.
Of course, I would be amenable to that. This is not an actual budget ask because we don't know what the budget should be. And so I think that the more we contextualize what we're asking from the superintendent, the better. So I think we can very easily amend that follow-on motion to include IEPs and 504s.
Thank you. Next, I have Dr. Anderson, followed by Mr. Fresh.
Thank you. I have a few questions because I don't think I built enough understanding around this, Ms. Corbett-Sanders, so please excuse me for that. The amendment is to increase the Young Scholars allocations, and that will be used for after-school activities. That's what I understood. Yeah, I knew I didn't understand. Go ahead.
Can someone please go ahead and mute their line? Thank you. Great.
Chair Marin, may I respond to Dr. Anderson?
Yes, please do.
So Dr. Anderson, the funding is to provide funding in the exact same way that we provide per pupil funding in our local level 4 and center-based programs, which is to provide those enrichment funds during the day. Because one of my concerns is that we want to have equity in treatment, but we also want to have, more importantly, we want equity in access, and not all of our students have access to transportation for after school programming.
And so I'm trying to get a sense of what that would look like during the day. Is this going to be additional personnel, materials? I'm so sorry.
It's additional materials and additional projects that might be brought to our students. We have made the investment as a board in having the AARTs funded, but we gave them no resources to actually provide their services.
Okay, thank you. And so the point 2 that will be taken out of after school, you're also sharing that we should replace that with ESSER funds, kind of making after school whole.
Correct.
Okay. I have no issue with your amendment because I think you're working within the boundaries of what we have created. But I do have to say this, and I've tried to say this before, but I don't think I've been as explicit. I just, when we're talking about access and equity, when we're talking about having opportunity to advance academics for our students, I worry that we've stood up an entire system that does not give them that access to this advanced academics by having this pit stop into Young Scholars. That's how I visualize it. That Young Scholars is a pit stop in lieu of kind of moving kids into the direction that we really want them to be in, which is advanced academics. So overall, I struggle with that because fundamentally, I think it's a separate and unequal system that has been set up. I really do, because we're not funneling kids towards the access, towards the opportunity that we really wanting them to do. We have this pit stop. I've been struggling with this for a very, very, very long time. And so I wanted to be sure that I offered that here. That having said that, it has nothing to do with your amendment, Karen. I've built understanding around your amendment and I get where you're going with it, but I'd like to have a bigger conversation, and this is not the time clearly to do that, regarding how we view Young Scholars. So thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Fresh.
Thank you. And thank you, Ms. Corbett-Sanders, for reaching out this morning and talking with me about the amendment. Generally supportive of its aims and its objectives. I think as I've thought about it, the one question I would have is, we have a public hearing coming up about the expenditure of ESSER funds. And I realize the sequencing here doesn't lend itself to having that before we take care of the budget here. But how would you respond to committing ESSER funds before we've had our public hearing? I know we're not technically doing that with the budget, right? But we're also, the board's also not going to cut the funding without also mentally taking that funding from ESSER. Go ahead, sorry.
Chair Marin, may I respond?
Yes, I appreciate your asking.
Thank you. Mr. Frisch, it's a very good question, but let's be very clear. We've already started signaling how we're going to be using ESSER funds through the discussion of what we're going to be doing with summer school programming. And so we do welcome and we want to hear from the community about where they want to see funds. But what this does is it allows us to acknowledge the importance of ensuring that students that may not have access to these opportunities will have access. The other piece that we need to be very clear about is that this is a very targeted amendment which ensures that our children actually, that the allocation is per child, whereas the $180,000 that is currently in the budget is set up as a grant program, which would allow individual schools to apply for the grant to be able to provide programming, and it would not ensure that an equity of access across every one of our schools where we have students that are young scholars. And so this ensures it gets into our, it ensures our students receive this allocation, or that the allocation is made per pupil, and identifies that the ESSER III funds are defined by the federal government to, or we are required to provide certain types of services, and this would very neatly fit into that.
I appreciate the answer. And I also appreciate the creativity. Sloan Dr. Presidio, Dr. Brabrand, could you address why we currently do it through, why we currently fund young scholars on a non-per pupil basis? What was the impetus for that approach?
So we actually don't currently fund young scholars. What we have in the proposed budget is a proposal for, as Ms. Corbett Sanders said, $200,000 of funding that we would make available to schools based on schools' proposals to provide services after school or in the summer. And we did that as a recommendation from our external study that was presented to the board on AEP equity issues back in the summer. And then staff provided a follow-up set of responses to those recommendations back in the fall. And one of the things that the study called for was for the school system to provide some line item funding for young scholars as part of our division's talent development opportunities to create more equity and access and put students on the road for AAP formal identification. So this would be the first time that the board had actually allocated any funds for young scholars in the division's budget.
And why what tipped the decision for the proposed budget to be more of a grant process than a per pupil spending process for that, following through on that suggestion?
Really just kind of, thinking about where schools are at with their capacity coming out of the pandemic to juggle a lot of different competing priorities, and recognizing that schools might be in some different places. We thought that, that might be the best way to approach it right now, but I definitely support and appreciate Ms. Corbett Sanders' suggestion for this amendment to just make it on a per pupil basis, which would be a more equitable way to divide the money across the system.
Yeah, it also seems to me that if you're a school that is, not that all of our schools don't have a lot on their plates, but for those that are, swimming in it more than others, it's probably harder for them to get, the request in for funding of a program versus just having it happen. So I appreciate the conversation. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Fresh. And next we have Ms. Sizemore Heiser and then Ms. McLaughlin.
Guys, I don't know what's going on. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, my computer's acting really funky right now. So if I look weird, I don't know what's going on. I feel like I look like I'm in outer space. But I'm not. I'm here on Earth. But first, I really appreciate that conversation with Mr. Frisch because that clarified some of these things. And I apologize. I've not had a chance to talk to Ms. Corbett Sanders about this amendment. So I have some questions for you all that I apologize I haven't had a chance to ask yet. But so my understanding, Dr. Presidio, from what you just shared is that we have not previously funded young scholars. So in the budget, we had proposed a sort of grant-based funding for after school or summer programs for young scholars. And instead, we're switching it to a per pupil allocation for funding for supplies during the school day. Am I understanding this correctly?
Yeah, that's correct. Supplies and experiences for students. So again, there might be some pull out of general education classroom experiences for some specialized learning experiences with students, and supplies and materials to support that happening.
Okay, so I think that's a great idea. I'm curious though, like, what's the difference in terms of the experience for our young scholars in doing it during the school day versus after school this summer? I understand in terms of access, and that makes a lot of sense to me that some students may not be able to stay after school or access summer programming, but in terms of what we're able to do sort of as discrete support for them, here's what I'm thinking, like, pulling out of classroom is difficult sometimes, and it sometimes happens in small chunks of time. As a parent whose child used to get pulled out before, when she was in kindergarten, first grade, it's sometimes it's hard to do more robust programming in small chunks of pull out time or programming. So I guess I'm questioning when we're trying to sort of develop talent here, which would be a better approach. And I don't have an answer for that. I'm sort of curious as to the thoughts around one or the other.
Sure, and I think it's really both. I think it's, we want to do both, and Ms. Corbett Sanders, the way she crafted the amendment, is signaling that we would want to do both, and that we use ESSER funds to provide those after school and summer opportunities in addition to the per pupil during the day activities. So, the way she has to craft the amendment with the understanding of the community engagement that has to happen before ESSER 3 funds can, be allocated, is signaling, basically the need, hopefully, to be able to do both, not just one or the other.
I did see that, and I do understand that, but I guess my concern is that the ESSER funds are not ongoing funds, right? They're one-time funds for this summer, maybe potentially next summer. So if we're going to try to do both, that's eventually going to have an additional budgetary impact. So what I wanted to get an idea of is, if we're choosing one or the other for our budget versus ESSER funds, an idea of which one is sort of the best bang for our buck, I guess is what I'm trying to get an idea of, because that will be ongoing funds versus one-time funds.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great question. And, kind of taking the budgets one year at a time sometimes is what we have to do. And, I think ultimately that would be a great conversation for the board to have in development of future budgets as well. But what I would say is, if we were not able to do both, allocating the funding, as Ms. Corbett Sanders' amendment would suggest, on a per pupil basis, would still give the school the ability to use those funds to support some after school and summer activities, as well as things that happen during the day. So it still wouldn't have to be one or the other.
Great, that's really helpful. Like I said, I really am very supportive of this programming and developing our talents. I'm glad Ms. Corbett Sanders brought this forward. One other question I have is that in terms of the per pupil versus grant funding, will that potentially result in some schools getting less funding than they may have gotten in our grant funding?
No, it would not. It would be an equitable distribution, and it would be on par with how we fund our level 4 students right now and the per pupil allocations that they get. So it's really the most equitable way to allocate the funds.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. Ms. McLaughlin.
Thank you. I just want to say that when Ms. Corbett Sanders is talking about the equity of our commitment, that we've had the external consultants from the university, experts recognized at the national level, talking about what do we do in growing our opportunities for students. I'm also mindful of what Dr. Anderson said, that if Young Scholars is not what we believe is the best program and solution going forward, then we need to have our staff talking about that. Because obviously we don't want to fund something that we don't think is producing the best results possible for ensuring all students can succeed and reach advanced level learning. However, if for going into this academic year, we're not going to change the delivery model for now, I don't want to lose an opportunity here to what I see Ms. Corbett Sanders saying is a win-win. We don't have unlimited funds, but we do have ESSER funds that do qualify for summer school enrichment. And I can't think of anything better than being able to dedicate ESSER funds to that effort because it will qualify, and then release, basically allowing those existing operational dollars to then carry into the fall and invest in that program that for the time being is the school system's best program in place. So I guess I also heard what Mr. Frisch said, and yes, we could say it's the cart before the horse, but we are where we are. Her amendment doesn't make it prescriptive, but I don't see why it's such a nominal amount. The fact that you've got 12 board members, countless staff, all talking about a $200,000 line item. Why don't we just do what we promised we were going to do, which is follow the recommendations and do something. So I really hope there's any support for this. And Dr. Brabrand, please weigh in if you've got any concerns.
Just one thing on the technical thing that Mr. Frisch raised, and maybe you're referencing the amendment for C says consider using. So we're not legally, you're not voting on Thursday to definitely put the money in. We have a process for ESSER 3 engagement. We'll go through it. And all the board is authorizing is that we'll consider it. If there was some reason in the process that it didn't, we could always look at year-end dollars. So I think we're fine. It is a little bit of a technicality, but we did try to work with Ms. Burden on the budget staff to use the word consider. So there's still flexibility. If something else comes up during the community process, we can find another place to spend it. And I do think you're right. We are having discussions about, is Young Scholars doing what we want it to do? Is it doing it equitably? It has had some success. Can it be better? We need to keep that model of continuous improvement going. But for now, we know an area that Ms. Corbett Sanders has identified where we can do better with the program, and we should. So it does have our support and our recommendation.
Okay, Dr. Anderson, did you have another question, or is that just a remnant from earlier?
No, I did have another question.
Sure. Yes, and Ms. Corbett Sanders, did you have a comment as well, or?
I would just like to, at the end, have a comment. Actually, I can do it now. What we're talking about is $15 per student in the Young Scholar program. That's what the 180,000 works out to.
Okay. All right, Dr. Anderson.
No, this is fairly quick. I got confused with something that Dr. Presidio shared in his response to Mr. Frisch. I think they were talking about the flexibility that would be provided. Did you say, Dr. Presidio, that once that allocation is made per pupil, there is going to be flexibility with utilizing it both during the school day and after school?
Well, when we allocate money on a per pupil basis, we provide guidance to the schools about how that money should be spent. So I was suggesting that if there was board concern, ultimately, and we were not able to secure additional funds for after school or summer programs, that we could offer the guidance to schools that they could spend the funds for during the school day, after school, or summer programs at that point in time if we needed to do that. So I was just foreshadowing that we would still have some additional flexibility in the guidance that we provided to schools after we know how the ESSER 3 funds are going to be allocated.
I guess I'm going down the path of, and again, I'm just trying to build understanding on this. If we have that flexibility, if we do a per pupil allocation and we could decide whether, with the guidance from central office, whether it's to be spent during school or after school, why don't we just do that anyway and skip the extra step of the ESSER 3 piece? Dr. Presidio.
Because the way that we the way that the superintendent's proposed budget was created, we did not allocate the funds on a per pupil basis. So we didn't do it that way. We did it basically through a process that schools would have to apply for those funds. So Ms. Corbett Sanders' amendment changes that and would allow us to allocate the funds in a more equitable way on a per pupil basis. And as several board members have pointed out, this is really just, hopefully the beginning of some allocations of funds to support our Young Scholars Program and which is our talent development model, which the consultants did recognize as a national model for equity and talent development. So this would be the first opportunity to put some funding in the program budget for that. And hopefully through the use of ESSER funds to be able to supplement that with some additional funding to go above and beyond what honestly is still a meager amount of funding when we think about supporting, the immense talent development needs that we do have.
No, I hear you, and I don't disagree with what you've shared or what others have shared, but I don't think that answers my question. What you had mentioned is if this was allocated on a per pupil basis, then there's high levels of flexibility in schools in terms of how it could be utilized. My question is, in lieu of allocating these funds to after school, why don't we just automatically make them per pupil? And then that flexibility is already built in.
So that's what Ms. Corbett Sanders' amendment does, is it modifies how the FY22 proposed budget was brought to the board, and it allocates the funds now on a per pupil basis. And then in addition to that, what I was suggesting is we can offer guidance on how those funds should be used, and we can modify that guidance if we need to do so, if we're not able to secure some additional funding through ESSER 3.
Chairman Anderson, something that Carl, Mr. Frisch said that's in my mind to explain it is, before you had to go and apply for it. You're so busy with so many other things. Now we're giving the funds directly to the school based on the per pupil allocation. So you got the money. You don't even have to go through this other hoop. The money comes to you, and then you use that money to—
Is somebody's mic on?
You use that money to support the Young Scholar students. So it's really cutting a step out and getting the money directly to the schools based on the kids that they have that are Young Scholars.
And then replacing those grants with ESSER 3 funds.
Correct.
Perhaps.
Correct.
Okay.
And even Ms. Sizemore-Heiser had asked about, a lot of times we can find more grants for summer and extracurricular than we can for the instructional program itself. So really, we're putting our operating dollars into our core instructional program, and we can continue to use ESSER dollars, but also look out in the marketplace for after-school summer activities that foundations might fund, business partnerships. So it's really a strategic move that's kind of a win on a couple of different fronts. Less steps for principals and more strategic using ESSER and perhaps private sector dollars for after-school and summer activities.
Thank you for that clarification.
I'd like to take a first turn before we go to second turns, please. So I had submitted budget questions, as you know, Ms. Corbett Sanders, when you called me this morning to talk about your motion. Budget question 16, budget question 38, and budget question 45 that also deal with per pupil spending on things like classroom supply allocation, basal materials and text, programs for AAP, computer software, honors level items. I had a whole slew of things that I was interested in figuring out how we could make that more equitable. Ms. Corbett Sanders, although you're saying it's just $15 per pupil, well, so is a lot of things when we say, it's just 180,000, and that's what these value judgments are for. Having worked so closely with the budget development, I'm really hesitant at this point to start piecemealing change, although I am conflicted because it seems like the superintendent is saying this is something that's desired, but it's just hard when it's like so close to the goal line here, and knowing how this budget has been drafted to fit together, and knowing that I have other questions about how other areas could be more equitable during the school day. I'm really I'm just I'm concerned about this. I don't want to start piecemealing things. We've heard that there's concern about Young Scholars. I have concerns about per pupil equity and allocations for the items that I listed. Other peoples have even talked about other programs. We're about to do this program audit. So, and ultimately, although I love quality after school and before school, why aren't we doing what we can while we have the kids there? And We don't, and as an aside, like, what about SAC? Like that whole barrel of monkeys. So, you know, I just feel like this is a bit too piecemeal for my appetite right now. And I certainly would love to, as I offered this morning, work with you on further delving into the budget ramifications of some of the items I've asked about already, but just didn't have time, the staff or myself, to really go through and present with a more complete picture. Thanks. So I'll leave it at that, I guess. And Dr. Anderson, you have your hand up. Is that a remnant? I believe it is. So I'll go to Corbett Sanders. Go ahead, Ms. Corbett Sanders, when you're ready. And I guess, well, are there any other second round or first round comments? If anyone wants to make a first round comment? No? Okay, great. So Ms. Corbett Sanders, if you want to.
So I absolutely understand, Ms. Marin, where you're coming from regarding concerns about what else we could be doing. But the parameters that were given to us was to have budget neutral recommendations. And what this is about is meeting a need which has been in existence for several years, for as long as I've been on the board, and I have raised this repeatedly. And this actually became a realistic and a strategic approach to addressing the needs of our young scholars, because the superintendent had put that $180,000 into the budget for grant funding. The challenge with grant funding is that the grant funding does not actually meet the individual needs of students. It depends on who can get to the table first. And when we are talking about equity in this county, we know that the Young Scholars is a talent development program that has been recognized. It may not be the perfect program, we know that, but it's the program in which we are dealing with today. And so I would just encourage that for a very minimal modification to the budget, this does reach the needs and better serves over 12,000 students in Fairfax County Public Schools. Additionally, I would suggest that this is precisely why we need to unpack the budget in more detail in the future, because it's when you start peeling back the onion that you see some of these decisions about how we allocate, and how we spend our money shows our values. So I would love to have the support at the board in supporting these 12,000 students and treating them with the same equity as our other students that receive advanced academic services.
Thank you. Well, let's go ahead to our final follow-on motion that was submitted, which was by Dr. Anderson. If we could have that pulled up, please.
Thank you so much. I'm so sorry. I don't think I see it up there yet. Okay, here it is, the first one. This follow-on motion is directing, hopefully, the superintendent to engage in an analysis of the compensation of our parent liaisons and to provide recommendations to the board before the next budget cycle. And this was born out of two particular reasons. One, when I took a look at what our parent liaisons have been tasked with, particularly during this pandemic, their job description, and I looked that up, and thank you to Kathleen Thomas for helping me procure all that information. It is very different from what they're actually doing. It is increased. It has increased exponentially. I have about 8 parent liaisons who responded to me to give me a sense of the work that they've been doing and how it has changed. It's gone from, in some places, just from interpretation to now running workshops with parents virtually in order for them to access the technology to support their students, all doing that in a secondary language. So the job, as I've been able to see it cursorily, has changed tremendously. And so I think we need to explore that. Also the PD, the list of professional development that the parent liaisons have been engaged in the past year, not just to include cultural proficiency, but equity, adverse childhood experiences, navigating families through virtual instruction, being trauma informed. Again, it speaks to the expansion of that position. Also, with a quick look of what other jurisdictions are doing regarding parent liaisons pay, just looking at everybody else FY21 budget that are posted, Loudoun County scale begins at $18.79 and ends at $39.49. Prince William's scale begins at $20.88 and ends at $49.43. Fairfax begins at 16 and 82 cents and ends at 29 and 69 cents. I just think it's really time for us to just take a look at this and to find out what information there is to ensure just compensation for these individuals, not only that is competitive, but is in keeping with the tasks that they are completing at this time.
Thank you, Dr. Anderson. I see a few hands up. Let's try and be as brief as we can, folks. We're closing in on 5. So I've got Ms. Omesh first, followed by Ms. McLaughlin.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Dr. Anderson, for bringing this forward. Obviously, I am really excited to see us have this conversation. I wanted to ask if you'd be amenable at all to also requesting, in addition to the WABE comparisons, an assessment internally. Because I think, this is, as we know, one of those under-resourced positions. And so my hunch is that we're going to find that across the board, there's a shortage of parent liaisons, and perhaps if we look internally as well, we might actually find ourselves needing more support than we end up calculating otherwise.
May I answer, Ms. Marin?
Yes, please go ahead. Sorry, trying to be quicker on the click.
I just need a little bit more information in terms of what you're saying. It sounds as if I would say yes to this, but when you're saying to figure out what is happening internally, I'm not 100% clear.
Yeah, so based on placements, for example, like, parent liaisons who are responsible for more than one school,
Okay.
Or ratios, like how many students are we actually expecting this parent liaison to liaise with the families of? I venture to say it's way too many for it to be manageable.
Okay.
Thank you.
No, I would be amenable to that. I'm happy to refine the language.
Thank you. Ms. McLaughlin, followed by Ms. Cohen.
Dr. Anderson, Dr. Brabrand had his hand.
Oh,
Yeah,
sorry.
so I think all you're saying is a parent liaison salaries and benefits and staffing among WABE districts.
Yeah, like
So
ratios.
we look at the salaries, we look at the benefits, and we look at the staffing, how it's staffed by X number of kids or whatever the formula is.
Right, but
Yeah.
also based on need internally. I think that's the piece I'm trying to capture, not just what others are doing, but what do we really need if we're going to be intentional about outreach?
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Next, Ms. McLaughlin, then Ms. Cohen.
Thank you. I would like to also add to that list, we really have to also have the job descriptions, because if you're really talking about benchmarking apples to apples, you have to have clarity on how are each of the school divisions using their parent liaisons, what are the job responsibilities and what are their job skills and training and professional backgrounds. And because as other board members have said, that our parent liaisons, and this was also brought up in our community schools subcommittee for SCIPT, talking about parent liaisons and how their roles have evolved over time. And I'm very grateful for the hard work that our parent liaisons put in. But depending on the job roles and responsibilities, we need to do also a comparison of the roles that our social workers play. I mean, we talk to a lot of social workers and they'll tell you they are so drawn into the IEP meetings and assessments and things that they're not even able to do a lot of the work that we're talking about parent liaisons taking on. And so I want to be careful that we really use a best practices approach in how we serve our families, and understanding the different and distinct roles that a parent liaison, which started out more translation services, certainly has become very vital to our schools, no question about it. But I think we have to be having a very clear picture of how these roles all intersect, how they complement one another. And yes, I will make the plug again that also includes school nurses and what they do, because they go far beyond just health. They go to all health and well-being And that includes identifying mental health that they see when kids show up in the clinic with their symptoms and recurring symptoms. So I can support this follow-on motion, absolutely.
Thank you, Ms. McLaughlin. Okay, we have Ms. Cohen followed by Ms. Tolan.
Yeah, I just wanted to say work expectations also as compared with what is actually happening. So like, you know, are we paying for professional development? Like, no. So are also when we look at what exit surveys we do with folks, I think it'd be really important to have HR weigh in here, because my understanding is we lost some pretty amazing parent liaisons who transitioned over to like the SIA position so that they could have benefits for their family. And then we also have the interplay of the parent liaison winding up supporting our SIAs and talk a little bit about the equity of having hourly employees without benefits, helping the work being done of folks who are. So totally supportive. I think this is a really important area to delve into. And as Dr. Brabrand said, like this year is another opportunity to reevaluate some of the roles that we have had and what has been prescribed for people. And so this is a perfect one of those. So thank you very much for that, Dr. Anderson. Hugely supportive.
Okay, Ms. Tolan followed by Ms. Sizemore-Heiser.
Yes, Dr. Anderson, thank you very much for bringing this forward. I think in my note back to you when you first sent it out to all of us was that I fully support this. And I think other colleagues have gotten to my biggest question in that, you know, our parent liaisons are paid hourly, and is that really the way we want to have it? You know, I think what you have so far gets at that. Do we want benefits? You know, how are other people setting this up? So I appreciate that. You know, I just want to say, even in my work, you know, before COVID with the school district, I often, you know, the parent liaison was often one of the first people we brought into our teams, even looking at, you know, sustainability and working with, you know, kids in a school in project-based learning because of their incredible connections to the community and gaining community support for the work that we were doing. And then certainly with the pandemic, I've had so many conversations, you know, Hutchinson Elementary, Coates Elementary in particular, with the administration and how key the parent liaisons were to their success in, you know, working with every single student during this past difficult year, and the families, the entire family. So thank you so much for highlighting this and bringing this forward. I fully support it.
Thanks, Ms. Tolan. Ms. Sizemore-Heiser followed by Ms. Corbett Sanders.
Thank you. And I apologize for not having my camera on. I'm having all sorts of issues today, so I'm just going to sort of leave it as it is. I won't repeat much of what my colleagues said. I fully agree on the job description piece of it. And I think as I'm listening to the conversation, I don't want to make this too big of a follow-on motion. So first, I fully support this. I think it's great. And I appreciate Dr. Anderson bringing this forward, just to be clear on that part. But I do think there's some room here. It feels like we have multiple staff members that fulfill overlapping but important roles. We have social workers, we have parent liaisons, we have psychologists, we have special ed department chairs. So really getting a handle on how, not just the job description, which I think is super important, as Ms. McLaughlin said, but how are our parent liaisons being used school to school? And then what are our needs in different schools? Because obviously we have different schools with different populations with different needs of parent liaisons as well. So sort of get a handle on job description, but also job need, and what's that interrelationship between our parent liaisons and other sort of staff there to support student and family wellness and engagement. You know, I think that's important to tease that out, because I do agree paying some as employees and paying some hourly, you know, versus, you know, salaried. I think there's some room here to sort of professionalize this position in a way that needs to be done. But those are all pieces that'd be interesting to see as we grapple with what we want to do budgetarily with our parent liaison positions. So that was all I had to add. Thank you, Dr. Anderson, for bringing this forward. I think it's very important. So I appreciate that.
Thank you. And I don't believe, Ms. Corbett Sanders, you didn't have your hand up. I must have misread that. Since the people with their hands up have, was that correct, Ms. Corbett Sanders? You didn't have a comment? No?
I do not have my hand up.
Thank you. Since we've completed a first round and we're 11 minutes from our closing time, I'm going to ask that we please move on. I believe there's another amendment or motion, and I want to make sure that person has time to be heard. So Ms. Keys Gamara, can I turn it over to you, please, to present your proposed action?
Sure, and I do apologize to my colleagues. I have presented a question to our staff members to try not to do this at the last minute, and I am looking for my language, but I didn't get approval and the language until about noon today, and as you know, we have been occupied. So you should have received it in an email. Just give me 1 second, and I will be happy to read the language. I am submitting the following motion at the request of Superintendent Brand as a follow-up to the board's action in a forum topic held on December 1st, 2020, which resulted in board consensus directing the superintendent to explore developing an academy program for the newly named John R. Lewis High School beginning in the summer of 2021. And I did take that language directly from our website. The board directs the superintendent to use year-end carry-over funds in the amount of $143,000 to fund the work of a program manager in the Office of Curriculum and Instruction focused on collaboration among internal and external stakeholders for academy design and development. So again, I did not have an opportunity to talk to anyone, and I will be using the next couple of days trying to do that. But this is simply an attempt to, one, respect the boundaries of our various discussions regarding the budget. I know that we want something that is zero neutral, but I also wanted to honor our previous vote. And I wanted to be able to at least try to find funds to move forward. In my discussions with our staff, it is my understanding that this one person would help us to figure out how to design and move forward. I will note that this is work that can be used wherever this board decides it can be used, but it would focus on what we have already previously outlined. And so this is a compromise to try to do that, to be respectful, but at the same time, signal to the community that we are moving forward. Before I open up the floor, I hope that Dr. Presidio is here. He said that he would be helpful. He would be able to help in terms of explaining where we are. And I did get this request directly from him. So if he could come on now, I would appreciate that, so that we can do our best to address concerns that I know that my colleagues who just got this information may have.
Absolutely. I'm happy to do that. Thank you. And hopefully you can hear me okay. I'm now having to connect with my phone due to some other issues as well.
Yes, we can.
But thank you, Ms. Keys Gamara, for setting that up and for bringing this amendment forward. This is really, really important that we secure some additional staff to support the development of this program. And the instructional services staff and also the Chief Equity Office staff are really excited about this project. And we're very anxious to get started on this project in earnest over the summer. But one of the things that has to happen is we have to do a lot of community engagement work. We've had conversations, and have been approached by community members who are very excited about participating in this project, supporting our students with internships, work experience, opportunities, and many other ways that they can contribute and partner with us on this project. But there's a lot of development work that has to be done whenever we start a new program that will require us to develop new curriculum. And it's really important as we come out of the pandemic and recognize that there's so much work that our program staff, our existing program staff, are going to have to continue to do to support teachers with being able to support students effectively with returning not just to in-person learning in the fall, but also with standing up a limited virtual program for some students next year. That central office staff members really are overtaxed, just like our school-based staff are right now with workload issues. So we need to identify some temporary help that can help us move forward with developing this new program, particularly supporting the development and the engagement of community stakeholders and setting the vision for the program and outlining the program components. So this would not be a permanent position. We really look at this position probably as a one-year only position that we would probably want to renew for possibly 2 to 3 years, but this would not be a permanent addition to central office staff, but a temporary position to help us initiate the development of this critically important program.
Thank you, Dr. Presidio. I just wanted to clarify, Ms. Keys-Gamarra, or maybe Ms. Burden, you can help. Ms. Keys-Gamarra, you voiced what seems to be an amendment with a dollar amount, but we also, the Budget Committee has received language that seems to make it a follow-on motion. And I did just send that to you. So can you, either of you please clarify so that we know what we are talking about? If it's possible to post that visually so we can see, that would be really helpful, please. Thank you.
If it's,
Go ahead, Ms. Burton.
if it is allocating, I mean, normally follow-ons request a body of work to be completed, but it's the superintendent's job to figure out how that happens. This particular follow-on appears to request position authority for a new position and funding. And so if you take that part out and just make it a body of work, then it should stay a follow-on. If the intention is to allocate a new position with funding, then it needs to be an amendment. Otherwise, it wouldn't be in the budget.
So thank you, Ms. Burton. As I said,
I was just wondering if there's language we could post, please. Would that clarify as well? Ms. Keys-Gamarra?
well,
Oh, here we go.
yeah. And
I
so
also
this
have something.
language,
Yeah, and then there's just also the other thing I sent you, Ms. Keys-Gamarra, with the more of a motion language follow on.
so I'm going to follow the direction of the superintendent. I have submitted this to him as the follow-on. I did not get to talk to Ms. Burden until just now. Excuse me. So I'm thinking that the temporary funding is what makes it a follow-on rather than a budget amendment. But you know, in full disclosure, I certainly want you guys to know what information has been given to me. So Dr. Brabrand or Ms. Burden, if you want to clarify on that, that's fine. But that is how I presented it to both Mr. Presidio and Dr. Brabrand. This was previously discussed before I submitted it to you guys.
Well, I mean, what I'd say here is, I mean, we're trying, again, Ms. Keys-Gamarra, you and I were working together and talked on Friday, your interest about a budget amendment. And then, talking yesterday, I mean, I have not had a chance to have further emails from last night to this morning as we're trying to make things happen very quickly. But I'm sure between now and Thursday, we can work on what the right language is and whether you want this as an amendment or as a follow-on. And, we could do it now, but my recommendation is to just offline work with Ms. Burden to figure out, your best intent and what you want. We're here to serve the board in the budget process for both amendments and follow-ons, and we want to do that here for you as well. So we can figure out the language. I would recommend offline and then have it out later this afternoon or evening.
Well, given that we have had a long day and we've got more work ahead,
Yeah.
I think that's probably the best way to go about it. But this is my best attempt to not spring something on my fellow colleagues. To say, Dr. Brabrand, I know you and I didn't speak until last week, but prior to that, I'd spoken with others. And unfortunately, this is kind of how it landed. Not the way I wanted it to go forward, but it's certainly better than getting it Thursday.
Sure.
At any rate, that is, I would like to iron that out, but this certainly gives my board members an opportunity to give me some feedback. I will reach out to every single person that I can get to between now and Thursday,
because I know that is the way I like to be treated when I do something. But I wanted you guys to know where I am.
Thank you. So just because we are at our 5 o'clock time, I see 2 hands up with questions. So if those folks could keep it to 2 minutes, and knowing that more information is forthcoming from Ms. Keys-Gamarra, then perhaps we could hear those comments and then do a quick pulse of the amendments and follow-ons that we have in so far as it can help us with Thursday. If anyone opposes that, let me know. Okay.
Ms. Marin,
Laura Jane?
oh, sorry. Will we have an opportunity to address the new changes that we're just seeing for the first time in the budget as well?
Well, from here on out, it's Thursday or bust. So, you know, anything can be done. Things can be addressed at the dais. The more we do here, you know, makes it better and more transparent. So. Okay, so I didn't catch who was first. So Ms. Tolan, followed by Dr. Anderson, Ms. Keys-Gamarra.
I just wanted to clarify when we were talking about the previous language. Wouldn't it be an amendment if we were talking about changing the FY22 budget that we would be voting on? Where what
Yes.
Keys-Gamarra has on the table is asking for year-end funds to be allocated for that position. So that's not an amendment to FY22. That would be a follow-on, is the way I view that. Just wanted to clarify.
A follow-on to FY22 or a follow-on for current FY21?
Well, it's not an amendment. Maybe I've got my years wrong. It's not an amendment to our current budget.
That's
She's
correct, Ms. Keys-Gamarra. You're not seeking for the current budget, are you?
So these are the things that I think need to be worked out, and I would prefer not to do it on camera. I and take up everybody's time trying to really figure that out. But thank you, Ms. Tolan, for that observation. I think going forward, those are the kind of things that we'll be ironing out.
Okay, fantastic.
So Ms.
Thank you.
Keys-Gamarra, do you want to continue to hear questions? What would you prefer?
Yeah,
since-
I mean, people who want to comment, I certainly want to give whatever time we have for that to happen. Certainly happy to hear.
Okay, because our list just doubled from when I spoke 2 minutes ago. So just trying to keep us going, folks. Okay, so Ms. Tolan, did you have anything further?
No, I just wanted to make that, it's just like a technicality in, you know, which budget are we talking about? So, and whether it's an amendment or a follow-on motion, but that can be that. People that do this more than I do can figure that all out. Thank you.
Okay, and I'm not sure I caught the order of everyone while we were talking and more questions keep getting asked, so I'll do my best here. Dr. Anderson?
Thank you. I'll be brief because I think I'm a little confused. I had to step away for just a moment. And so if this question was already asked, please let me know. I'm a little confused because I think the last, and I'm reading the motion from Ms. Keys-Gamarra that said that there was board consensus to direct the superintendent to explore developing the academy. So we're funding this position to do the exploration.
I am using the language that we posted, and that is yes. That and if Sloan wants to clarify that, I am simply following up on what was already decided. And I had discussions this morning and in the past weeks with Sloan about moving that particular language forward. Yes, that's my understanding.
And I guess
if Sloan wants to jump,
let me add just one more question for Dr. Presidio, and then I could just log off and I'll just listen to the answer. I'm a little confused here. I have a chicken and egg discussion going on in my head because
is it me or is she frozen?
I don't know.
Dr. Anderson,
she's frozen.
We've made a decision on the Lewis Academy, but we're funding it. So,
Dr. Anderson, can you just repeat? You cut out after chicken and egg.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm having some trouble. I'll try to turn off my camera. Maybe that would be helpful. I'm just having a little bit of an issue with the sequence. So if Dr. Presidio, you could help me understand, are we funding this position to help with the exploration, Or are we saying that we are having the academy and this is the first step? Because I don't remember the board making that decision as of right now.
Sure. No, that's a great question. And what I would say is what we need to do first is explore the development of the program. And the first step with that is to do some community engagement, which I would say would be significant in terms of really engaging community stakeholders around the opportunity that we've identified to develop a new program at Lewis High School that would honor John Lewis's legacy. And we have some general ideas of what that could look like, but we've not engaged the community to really establish a vision for a program there and to engage the level of community interest and support. Now, we have heard and community members have reached out to us in significant numbers to encourage us to move forward with the development of a program, but we've not done any formal engagement with the community on what a program could look like, what a vision for the program would be, what program goals would look like, what a program focus would mean for students there, as well as exploring, implications for, other, other aspects of programming that are currently offered at Lewis High School. So what we need to do is significant program development work in terms of community engagement, establishing what a program could look like there, and then re-engaging with the board based on that feedback that we receive from the community engagement, and talking about what our implementation timeline would be, what it would look like, what the implementation budget would look like, and re-engaging with the board to see if we have board support with moving forward. So this really is community engagement and program, scoping, if you will, that we can bring back to the board before we make the decision whether or not to implement a program at Lewis. But even to do those first two steps of community engagement and scoping of the program is a significant amount of work to do that. And we really do need some additional staff support to lead that effort. And that's what this budget amendment or follow-on motion would allow, is some temporary additional staff support to be able to lead that work and come back to the board with the results of community engagement, as well as an idea and proposal for what a program at Lewis High School could look like.
Thank you. Just one quick follow-up. I'm sure I have a little bit of time left, Ms. Marin. Is that okay?
Yes.
Is this typical in terms of establishing new programs? Do you typically have a dedicated person for that community engagement component? Because I've not been on the board when you've established new programs at high schools.
Well, that's a great question. And I will tell you that we've not really established new programs in my tenure here. But as I've been on leadership teams in other school divisions and have established other programs in other school systems, it is very typical that we do that. And we would not move forward with developing new programs without making sure that we had the staff available to support that work. Unfortunately, in Fairfax during my tenure, we've been very limited in terms of our budget support for developing new programs at scale. So we really haven't, this is kind of new territory for us, at least during my tenure here.
Is there anybody else on staff who could speak to that, who may have that experience? Dr. Brabrand?
One thing I would tell you, a couple of years ago with the prior board, and some of the board members are here, I shared academy staffing has been flat for 10 years. So we put academies in the 80s and 90s. The first person who brought the academy concept was actually Dr. Spillane. We built them, and then we've done very little to change the foundational structure of those academies over the years. So I do think ultimately, again, this is a broader discussion. This is not really, I think, it might start with the look at the Lewis Academy. But I know Sloan's already having a consultant come in and look at our existing academies. And I think this program manager may even help us take that information and help us restructure our academies, much like we've looked at making changes to advanced academics. We've had a set system in place for a long, long time. We've never added staffing over 10 years. And I do think as we come out of the pandemic, and we really talk about every child by name and by need, we need and have our equity lens. How are these academies working for our kids, and are they reflective of the needs now in 2021? So those are some thoughts.
Thank you for that, Dr. Raybrand. I know that I heard the tail end of this is still being worked, so I look forward to getting to that space, and perhaps I can speak to you, Ms. Keys-Gamarra, to ask some additional questions and not make the sausage here, but I do have some additional questions, but I don't want to take up any more time. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Corbett Sanders, followed by Ms. Pekarsky.
Sure. And my question really is driven by what Ms. Tolan mentioned, because can I clarify, this is a temporary position, correct, Dr. Presidio?
That's correct. The way that we envision this position would be, just for a couple years to be able to help us first with year one to do the program, development proposal that we could bring to the board along with the community engagement. If the board decides to move forward with the program, then we would want to retain that position probably for another year or two to help us with some of the initial program development. But this would be a temporary position. This would not be a permanent position.
So that's really important to note, because what we typically do with year-end money is we use year-end money for those temporary type positions and those temporary or special projects. Is that correct, Ms. Burden?
It varies. I mean, we try to do temporary positions out of year-end funds because they're one-time funds. But oftentimes at the quarterly, at any of the quarterly adjustments, positions can be added, and then they end up being, having to be built into the baseline for the next year. So both.
So it gives us flexibility to utilize those funds and postpone any sort of finalized decision, correct?
Well, in my experience, we don't usually use year-end funds for a position in the adopted budget. We did with FCPS on because we're replacing revenue, because the FCPS on is elimination of a revenue line item. And so to replace it with an increase in beginning balance, also a revenue item, makes sense. But we normally would not fund something out of future year end. And then in addition to that, the year end this year won't come to the board for adoption until September, and because of the change in schedule. So I think Dr. Presidio needs, if this work is to be done this summer, September's too late.
So I guess I'm a little confused. I didn't realize we were dealing with year end a little bit later this year. But my question really is, the precedent has been set, even with our staff aides, we used year end, or we used carryover funds for staff aides. And it's something we've done in the past. What is intriguing in how Dr. Presidio described this was not only the role that this person on a temporary basis might play in supporting the scoping and the exploration for the Lewis Academy, but that they could also support the work that this board just approved a couple of weeks ago regarding exploring the academy of programs across the county and whether they were meeting all the needs of our students. And so this is really an interesting use of a carryover or a year end. I apologize, just ignore my phone. It seems to me that since it's not a going concern, that it's not part of the operational budget. It makes sense. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I do want to say that unless there's opposition, I'd like to ask that we conclude by 5:30. We have 3 hours of meetings ahead of us. So if there's any opposition to that, can you show it now? That might mean that we might not have time to take a straw poll vote. So I can't tell who's opposing because people have their hands up.
Mayor?
Yes, Ms. McLaughlin. Mhm.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's important that those of us who have our hands up be allowed to speak.
Yeah,
This is
that's what I'm saying. I'm saying, can we go
Yeah.
through, but can the four of you please keep that within 5:30 so that we can adjourn?
We'll do our best, but I mean,
Well, I need to go at 5:30, so someone else would have to take over if that's the
Dr.
case. So
Anderson.
let's just keep going forward. Thank you. That was Ms. Corbett Sanders, Ms. Pekarsky, followed by Ms. McLaughlin.
Yeah. Thank you. Sorry, I apologize. I can't turn on my camera, but all of you are going in and out. So I guess I am extremely confused. Number one, why the confusion as to whether or not this is a follow-on or an amendment, because to me, it seems pretty clear it's an amendment. We heard this would be for a year, but then 3 years came up. You know, when this Lewis Academy that we all agreed was a phenomenal idea last year at the forum came up, the board voted and the board vote actually failed the first time. And then we amended the request and said that this is something that the board would not include in the budget this year because of obvious reasons with what we are, going through with COVID. And we would come back in the summer to sit down, reassess, have a discussion. Since then, we've also approved a more holistic, program review to see access, find gaps. We haven't done that either. So I guess I'm very confused as to why we would prioritize this at this point over the many other things without even coming together as a board to discuss, is the board united in saying we want to go ahead with this? And if we require a whole nother position to even have the discussion, which I don't understand, I guess I just don't understand what our priorities are, or, if we're being strategic in our, priorities. And so I have concerns with the process and the transparency. Okay, that's it.
Thank you, Ms.
So if I can respond, Ms. Pekarsky, the language that you have before you is what our clerks recorded. And I wasn't being creative. So I think the way you described it is slightly different than what I remember it, and it's different than what we have on our website announcing the consensus that was achieved in that December meeting. So that is what I will say to that. I don't believe that the result of that meeting in December was that we would come back and make a decision in the summertime. As a matter of fact, that specific language was stated by a board member. And in response to that, I made a second motion. So I do want to clarify that, because I think there were those who did want to go that route, but that was not the end result of what was achieved this past summer in December.
Thank you. I will certainly go back, and I welcome other people speaking to this as well, because then I would have a grave misunderstanding as to where we ended. But, I think we need more conversation and to build some understanding around this. And I apologize for taking more than my allotted time.
That's okay. I would need to clarify that, because if I thought that was the case, I wouldn't have brought this. I wouldn't have brought this forward.
Okay, we have
quite frankly.
We have 3 speakers left, Ms. Ms. Sizemore-Heiser, and then Ms. Cohen.
Did you say McLaughlin's up next?
I did.
Okay. I thought I was at the caboose. Look, I was one of the people who was supportive that we should explore this proposal, but this one's taking me by surprise. I'm going to be honest, and I'm going to place this at Dr. Brabrand and Dr. Presidio, because Ms. Keys-Gamarra has been very transparent and very passionate about her belief and the urgency and the importance of Lewis Academy. But as I remember it, this board was very clear in saying, we want you to, Dr. Braybrand, you and your team, we're going to come back to this board and you're going to talk about what this program might be, what it would cost to stand up this program. And I respectfully disagree with what Dr. Presidio just said. I am not comfortable. First of all, number one, year-end funds are decided the year-end fund vote, not now. So the follow-on motion, Ms. Keys-Gamarra, I would definitely support if you want to direct the superintendent to bring back information for the board's consideration in support of using year-end funds, but we can't dedicate or commit in a follow-on motion how we're going to spend year-end funds now. That's not fair to what Ms. Pekarsky said. We've got a whole line of items that board members are advocating that are important with our year-end funds, and I can't commit less than about 48 hours from now at a budget meeting for 2021 on year-end funds, or for the year-end funds for 2021 when we're voting on the FY 2022 budget in 2 days. They're two separate and distinct budget actions and budget decisions. So I think that the wording needs to change so we're not being resolute that money is essentially earmarked and taken out. But secondly, Dr. Braybrand, I'm definitely trying here. This one's come out of nowhere, and listening to you and Dr. Presidio speak so strongly in support of it, I feel a little bit, once again, I don't want to use the word blindsided because it's a little bit hard, but this is coming out of nowhere for me. And using $143,000 for a program manager, I don't even know what their job description is, what their job qualifications are. You can tell. I'm just shocked at how staff is jumping in and saying, do this, and this board didn't talk about it to get this far. I think there's a lot of confusion.
Thank you, Ms. McLaughlin. Thank you. Who's next? Ms. Sizemore Heiser, and then Ms. Cohen.
Thank you. I'm glad to follow there. I'm a little confused as well because my recollection, the language in the motion is correct that we were going to explore beginning in summer of 2021. So I'm a little confused how we're being asked to vote on funding for any position related to this when the exploration was supposed to begin summer of 2021. And then Dr. Braybrand, you talked about sort of what this position could do in terms of, reviewing our academies, and we haven't reviewed our academies, or academy staffing has been flat, but the motion as I read it has nothing to do with all of our academies. It just has to do with Lewis Academy. So can you explain a little bit how your rationale about the need for reviewing all of our academies is related to this motion?
It's not related to the motion. It was amusing here. My job is trying to work with 12 board members through a budget process. We're going to continue to partner with all of you and every board member who brings amendments. The timing sometimes is different, but we're committed to doing that. And, I think a lot of these discussions can happen offline between board members as we work through the process of bringing you, the final budget. But I think that's all I really want to say. I continue to partner. I want to partner, and we need to find ways to continue that partnership. Again, it's all transparent. No one's trying to pull something at the last second. People are super busy. And I'm not here to determine with board members who was first, who was last. I think we're all just trying to work together. And then in the end, it's agree or disagree with what's being proposed. And all of you have different ideas and different passions.
Listen, I appreciate that. And I'm not trying to imply anyone's being non-transparent or anything like that. I'm just, I look to staff to help us understand the rationale and reasons. I know Ms. Keys-Gamarra has worked with staff. And so when I hear a rationale that doesn't make sense to me, I ask questions about it.
Yeah. And I'd say here's the bottom line. Staff is fried. They're exhausted from work. Dr. Presidio has more work he's got to do this summer and getting ready for 5 days. And you all talked about doing some work around the concept of Lewis Academy this summer. I don't have the wording in front of me. We can go back and look at that between now and Thursday. To do some of that work, Dr. Presidio would prefer to have a temporary position to do it than task his people who are already tasked to the max to do one more thing. So, in the end, the board will need to consider all of that as it makes a final decision. But I think that's the spirit of what's in front of you today.
I guess that I would ask you and Dr. Presidio, because I remember that was a lot of our discussion when we voted on the motion, was the overwork of our staff and overwhelm of our staff and capacity to do this. One reason why I put it off to the summer. So I guess I would ask you, when you're looking at staff overwhelm and overwork, what is your number one priority for support that you think you need to help with staff? Or is it someone for Lewis Academy to scope it out? Or is it, is that your number one need for additional funding?
Thank you. I'd like to make sure Ms. Cohen gets her comments.
I'm sorry, did my time?
Is it a question? Sorry.
Yeah, it was a question. I didn't hear my buzzer go off either, so.
Sure. I'm not sure who that was aimed at.
Dr. Brabrand or Dr. Presidio?
Well, I would just say.
Go ahead. I wanted to make sure I think Ms. Williams wanted to weigh in, but go ahead, Mr. Presidio.
Folks, I just want to say we have a hard stop in 4 minutes and Ms. Cohen needs to
Right.
speak.
That's why I'm trying to let him.
So
you can maybe just answer my question. I would maybe go faster that way.
I would just say briefly, I wish it was that simple, but the list of things that we've added in terms of new work for the division over the course of the year, even during a pandemic, is exhaustive. I mean, we continue to add new work. I mean, we're in the process right now of getting ready for summer. We're getting ready for standing up a virtual program, which we didn't anticipate doing. We're, of course, in the process of returning for in-person learning. We've added, the program budget review. We're adding additional work around supporting our literacy improvement plans. All of this are additional things that do require additional staff to be able to do the work well. And, from my perspective, the reason I'm supporting this amendment that Ms. Keys-Gamarra is bringing forward is, this was something that the board asked us to prepare to do, community engagement and scoping what a possible new program, academy or other at Lewis High School could look like, and to be able to do that work and do it well and engage the community in that, do the research about, similar programs that exist in other places that might serve as models. All of that's going to take a lot of time. So we really do need additional staff to be able to do this well.
Thank you, Dr. Presidio. I guess I don't recall the board meeting talking about community engagement, and I was starting to explore. So I guess I'm confused, and I still think, and I totally understand why you are overwhelmed and staff is overwhelmed, but I still would like an answer as to, if staff is this overwhelmed and you're standing up all these things, why are we not looking at funding for, let's say, virtual programming for next year, which is an urgent need, and additional staffing to help support you developing that, or the strategic program review, which can then help us inform what we need and where. So that's what, it still doesn't answer my question of why is this the one thing you're asking for additional funding for staffing?
So, Dr. Presidio, Ms. Sizemore-Heiser, I'm going to try my best to get an answer to you, but if we could just take 30 seconds for Ms. Williams to be able to respond.
Sorry,
and
Ms. Keys-Gamarra, Ms. Cohen is a board member and she's waiting to speak. So it really is vital that we allow her that opportunity. You wanted to hear input from your colleagues, and this is that opportunity. So Ms. Cohen.
I understand. I also was trying to make sure we got as much information from staff as possible, since the question centered around that.
Well, I'm going to ask that Ms. Cohen have her opportunity, please. Ms. Cohen, please.
No, it's fine. I will ask that exact question. I think what Ms. Sizemore-Heiser just asked, if we're saying that we need some additional staffing in the department to look at program review, or even academy programs review generally, like, I know this is not the normal way that we do this. And so I guess that's my larger question, and maybe that's a let's table and have later, but I think it'd be helpful to have Dr. Brabrand weigh in, and maybe it's a conversation with all of us about Like, where do you see, if you had $150,000 to have us be successful in the fall, is this what you would choose and how do we get there? So I'm just interested in the more global conversation about, I agree. My understanding was that we were tabling this until the summer. I understand Dr. Presidio saying, if we're going to have the conversation this summer, there needs to be some work that happens on the front end. So then maybe that conversation is that the conversation starts in the fall. So I just want to make sure we're not in a situation where we have the tail wagging the dog. Is this the best use of our funds right at this moment? Or can it be a more general person that we do just need? And this is a piece of what they do. Totally open to all of those.
If I can, Ms. Keys-Gamarra, I'm chairing this, and we've spent 45 minutes on your one amendment, and we're now at time. We must take a break before we enter 3 hours of committee reports. I'd like to take a quick pulse of the board, please, to see if we have, so that staff can prepare for an omnibus action. So if we could please just run through that right now, and we could figure out how, with Ms. Keys-Gamarra, we know that you have more information forthcoming. So let's just get through the 5 that were posted prior, please. So the first amendment about the FCPS on fee by Ms. Pekarsky. Can we just say any oppositions? Let's do any oppositions. Okay, I see no oppositions for that motion. Excuse me, that amendment. The second amendment was from Ms. Corbett Sanders about the young scholars changing of funding, not adding more funding, but moving the funds around. Is there any opposition to that? I think I'm gonna say I had some. Okay, on the follow-on motions, then we have Dr. Anderson's about the parent liaison salaries, looking into an analysis. Any oppositions on that? I see none. Ms. Pekarsky's bus driver, bus attendant salaries and benefits analysis. Any oppositions to that? And then Ms. Corbett Sanders, I see none for that one. Ms. Corbett Sanders follow on about staffing with large preschool programs with high levels of IEPs. Was there any opposition to that?
Madam Chair, may I have a point of clarification?
Sure.
I know that both Ms. Pekarsky, all 3 of the follow-ons had modifications at the board table when we are voting with no, showing no concerns about it. We are voting that will include those modified language, correct?
Yes, thank you for the reminder. Yes, Ms.
Yeah,
Burden.
we have them. We have the changes.
Okay, great. And then for Ms. Keys-Gamarra's item, I think it would be premature to ask about support since she's going to be getting us some more information. So that will happen in the next 48 hours. So with that, Ms. Burden, do you have anything else to add as far as technical things?
No, we're good.
Okay, great. Then I'm going to adjourn us. We have 27 minutes before our committee reports. I'm not sure, Dr. Anderson, if you're, Ms. McLaughlin, we need to adjourn right now.
I have a procedural question.
I have a
Aaron, you can step off then and our chair will take the question, but I have a procedural question as we're going into a budget vote in 48 hours. And it has to do with the fact that how are we going to have a follow-on motion that dedicates year-end funds? They're not one and the same.
That's not, Ms. Keys-Gamarra is not, it's not clear if that's what she's presenting.
Oh, but
that's what she's going to get back to us about.
But I think our CFO should make that clarification for all 12 board members so everyone's clear and we understand. You can't have a follow-on.
Ms. McLaughlin, if you would allow me to have that conversation, I would really appreciate it. Thank you.
No, it's not for you, Ms. Keys-Gamarra, it's for all 12 of us. I don't want
I understand, but we can't discuss something that isn't firm.
No. I'm not talking about yours. I'm talking about in general, any of us could bring a follow-on motion between now and Thursday
That's
night.
right. And then it would not be part of the omnibus and it would be an additional action item.
Right. But
as
more
has been
importantly,
said many times.
Yes, but more importantly, I want to make sure that people know to not bring follow-on motions that are committing year-end dollars because it's out of order to
Got
vote.
it. Understood.
Okay.
Understood. Okay, so now we have Dr. Anderson, who is convening our 6 p.m. meeting. Is it the chair of the liaison, excuse me, to the committee, or you?
It will be the first committee liaison, which is Ms. Cohen for FPAC.
Great.
And then I will be chairing the second piece because Fate does not have a liaison.
Okay, so we will meet back here at 6. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.